Welcome to the Tech Show. My name is Thomas Richard. I am joined by Corné von Driel and Erin Vinstra today. Erin,
Hi,
introduce yourself.
hello. Thank you for having me. I am a head of solution architect here at Unlimited and happy to be joining you on today's show.
Well, today we're going to have a conversation about some of the differences of working in the Salesforce ecosystem versus working in the HubSpot ecosystem. Maybe not even ecosystem, maybe just platform in general. Um, but I'm gonna start with a quick little story when Erin first joined us. Erin, when did you join us? Was it like 2 years more?
Almost 2 years, September of
All right,
2004.
so almost 2 years. So anytime we hire any position here at Unlimited, we do a tech assessment. And Erin had pretty deep background on the Salesforce side, and so when we did the tech assessment, um, she was putting in a lot of effort on the HubSpot side, but really we just needed to understand like how she thinks, how she works through problems, how she works through solutions. So Corné and I were like, you know what, let's put together a Salesforce one first. And obviously you crushed that, but I don't know, Erin, in your words, I don't know, go back to that, share a little bit about the initial switch here.
When I found myself jobless in July of 2024, I was looking around the Salesforce ecosystem because that's where I'd had a lot of experience. I started as a user in 2009. I transitioned into an admin pretty quickly after that. I had worked in consulting and I wasn't having a lot of luck. And there was a previous coworker that reached out and said, "Hey, we have this job at this HubSpot agency. Would you be interested?" And I was like, "I don't know anything about HubSpot. I don't know if I can do this." I was very nervous and got through the interview, went through the tech assessment, and I was desperately searching like YouTube, anything I could find for, I think it had something to do with lead routing. And I was like, I don't know. Like from the Salesforce side of things, HubSpot was a marketing platform. I had no idea that it had, lead routing and any of the CRM features that it actually had. So I did my best. I was like, we'll see. And Thomas, I don't know if you remember this, but you reached out and said, "So it's very clear you don't know HubSpot, but we would like to give you another opportunity." So you'd meet with Corné, the CTO, and myself, and we'll go through the Salesforce side. And I was like, whew, I know the Salesforce site. So that night I sat down and I basically redid everything in for myself in so I had notes in Salesforce. We talked the next day and it was a great conversation. It was probably the first time that I was like, okay, the skills or the knowledge that I have will transfer over into a different CRM platform. And that conversation just made me really excited to join UTS and you guys in general as leaders. So I was very happy that worked out.
And Corné and I at the time, this is 2 years ago, we've since repeated this many times since then, but our working theory was if you can succeed in the Salesforce platform, you're going to be exceptional on the HubSpot platform because the Salesforce platform is harder to operate in. And that's proven to be quite successful since then. But Erin was the guinea pig, first one through the door there.
Salesforce is a very complicated platform. And I think that one of the advantages that I had in that ecosystem was that I had been around for quite some time and that I started as a user. And so I kind of grew up, so to speak, with the platform as it started bolting on different solutions that they purchased over the years. I just was able to carry over the platform knowledge that I incrementally learned. I think one of the hardest parts about the Salesforce ecosystem is that they put so much stock in their certification system. And it's essentially a test, right? Can you pass this test? Which is super unfair because there are softwares out there that now help you study for those tests and it's answering questions. And I'm not a great test taker. I don't take the time to, learn the Salesforce way to pass that test. And so I got my industry knowledge and my working knowledge of the platform was quickly surpassed by people that were 17 times certified and hadn't worked a day in Salesforce. And that actually ended up souring me quite a bit on that ecosystem because they built up the admin program so well. And then they had just kind of pivoted it away to um, focus more on the certifications and the executive side of it that, um, yeah, it was, yeah, like I said, when I got the chance to leave the ecosystem, I was like, yep. And then I didn't take very long to go, yep, that was not a good environment for me to be in.
How long do you think it took before you were, I don't know, building at that same level of confidence? Building's probably the wrong word, but designing, solutioning at that same level of confidence in the HubSpot side compared to the Salesforce side. And I guess maybe even in the same answer, if someone were looking to make the jump from working on the Salesforce side into the HubSpot side, um, what what how would you describe the experience?
The second week that I was at Unlimited, it was inbound. So all you
We
guys
were at
left.
inbound. We just left you.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. And so, I mean, you left me like my plan of like do these videos, and I was cranking through some of those certification videos. And that third week, I was like, Corné, you got to give me something else to do. I can't watch another video. And so we had a new project. It was a Salesforce migration. And so it's like, okay, well, that seems up my alley. So let's give this a try. And there was a lot of property mapping. There were a lot of early mornings with Corné, very early mornings, 5:36 my time, because that's when I could get on his extremely busy calendar, trying to figure out how to make things work. That project, um, I overcomplicated it. So in Salesforce world, you have a lot of custom objects. You have a lot of what's called junction objects, which is connecting two things together. In the HubSpot world, it's association. I would say the only difference in those two things is that in a junction object, you can have other custom object or other custom properties with it. In an association, you get the association and the label, and that's it. And so it was not, I would do a lot of different things now that, now that I know. But so I would say anybody making the transition, I tell them the first thing you have to do is forget how complicated Salesforce is. If you're looking at HubSpot and saying that seems too simple, it probably really is that simple. I have said several times in the last 2 years that HubSpot took the time and is taking the time to get a lot of the things right that Salesforce got wrong. And that's a huge advantage to their platform. It's a huge advantage to the user experience, to the admin experience, to um, just it will be very good for the platform in the long run.
At the end of the day, you're solving the same types of problems.
Yeah.
They look the same. The shape of the problem is the same. The businesses are the same. You're using a slightly different tool, and the tool's a little bit more ergonomic.
Yep.
It's a lot less cumbersome to get to the same result, or as good a result with a lot less steps, which, like you said, sometimes you have to unlearn all the complex things that you've done in the past, all the
Hmm.
ways you've solved in the past, and just think about it. I want to say logically because that makes it sound like the other way isn't logical, but just abstract away all the difficulties. Just look at where you want to go and take the simplest, easiest path there.
Yeah.
The moment you start overcomplicating it or start trying to be clever, things start going a little bit wrong pretty
Yeah.
rapidly, right?
As easy it is to mess up Salesforce, it's equally as hard, in my opinion, to mess up HubSpot because they have put around, you can only have 10 custom objects. So you have to be very thoughtful on how you're introducing those into the platform. I also find that the clients are a lot more open to keeping things simple on the Salesforce or on the HubSpot side than they were on the Salesforce side. So that's probably um, again, a huge advantage. That's probably has to do with the sales cycle, I would assuming that HubSpot, doesn't make it sound like, oh, it's a completely, you can't customize every part of HubSpot. And when you say they don't give you that kind of power just yet, but they're changing things rapidly, keep an eye on it. They're generally pretty open to what we can provide for them.
There's also at least a small aspect of that that comes from previous platform experience. So perhaps it's the sales process that HubSpot follows in order to get new clients. But there's probably also a little bit of we came from a platform that we over customized and that we paid the price in consulting fees, expense, time, just complexity and understanding and difficulty in onboarding new staff members, and then trying to troubleshoot it when something goes wrong. a lot of, at least our client base, come from things that were way too complicated and costly versus what was actually necessary.
And it's a lot of that probably comes from Dreamforce, which is Salesforce's version of inbound, right? But it takes over downtown San Francisco for about a week. It is gigantic. It is exhausting walking to all of the sessions that you go to. But they have these daily keynotes, and they highlight like a Coca-Cola and how well they use Salesforce. And over the years, I kind of learned that they're probably a little, you know, smoke and mirrors, or blowing some sunshine on the user experience. But Salesforce was so big and so massive that it was really hard to even feel like you were scratching the surface in the features that you're implementing for a client. And most people don't have a Coca-Cola size budget to implement a CRM, or the staff. Like, I know that there's a uh, company here in town that their admin staff is like 70 people, and that's just their US based staff, Salesforce admin. They have their own training platform, but they've invested millions of dollars. But the clients we work with don't have those kind of budgets.
I don't know how you're going to answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So I spend a lot of time in our business on the sales side, and what I hear now, I hear less now than I used to several years ago. But I think Salesforce has positioned themselves as the kind of go-to platform for larger enterprise or upmarket clients. You on our team obviously work with some pretty good-sized clients. Is that kind of positioning a reputation as, hey, if you're this larger upmarket client, that you need to be on Salesforce and not on HubSpot? Does that, from a solution standpoint or a technical standpoint, does that merit like the type of attention that it gets now?
Yeah, I think the two things that I would pay attention to in a large engagement is security, because HubSpot security is very simple, especially compared to Salesforce. Salesforce security is complicated. You try to explain it to someone and they kind of glaze over. They have no idea what you're talking about. Um, but again, it's very easy to screw it up, and it's very easy to, wipe out someone's entire permissions, with the stroke of a couple check boxes. So that's one thing that I would pay attention to. The other thing I would really hone in on very early in the engagement is how much personalized customization they need for a particular team. Because so Salesforce did page layouts, which we have in HubSpot for the team layouts, but they're used to scrolling through, tons of properties. Now they even have dynamic lightning page layouts where you can make things conditionally visible. It is highly customizable. You can do visual force page inserts in there, which we can do custom cards. So um, I think that for the most part, we can get feature parity, but I think you have to make sure you have the right subscriptions to be able to get there. And then you have to have the right developer to help you work through some of those custom cards. It does get somewhat limiting. Sometimes you can't put a card in a particular place that the client wants it. Usually not a big deal, but sometimes in those larger organizations, when they're used to being able to dictate every step of that user experience, it can get somewhat limiting. So if they're open to, this is what it is now, keep an eye out because they're changing things frequently, then it generally is okay.
Let me test another thing that I say a lot on the sales side. Um, when we are in an upmarket opportunity and we are competitive with Salesforce, one of the assumptions that I have and that I share is a Salesforce implementation, same requirements, but HubSpot versus Salesforce. I said, or I often say, if we needed to build that same thing on the Salesforce platform, it would take us more time, and that level of effort would be more on Salesforce than it would be on HubSpot. Therefore, I find this to be true. A Salesforce implementation costs more, both initially and definitely on an ongoing basis, for just meeting like a general set of requirements. I'm not trying to like lead you on that. If that's not your experience, then love to hear. But would you agree with that? Like, if you had to build, both platforms equally well. If you had to build, essentially stand up, an implementation with a moderate amount of customizations, HubSpot versus Salesforce, like, is there parity in level of effort, or would that be, uh, you know, would that favor HubSpot? I guess.
It definitely favors HubSpot. And I'm actually not sure why. Like a page layout, property build, like basic admin stuff. It's pretty much a one for one. It's probably a little faster in HubSpot, and maybe that's just the way they walk you through building a property or a page layout. The workflows definitely easier on the HubSpot side. And I will say that there are again some feature limitations on the HubSpot side that you don't experience on the Salesforce side. I would say the biggest pain for me right now is looping. You have to have, a data hub to be able to do a custom coded workflow to loop through records. But the Apex or that workflow on the Salesforce side is very robust. There's a lot that you can do with it. They have worked very hard on that feature to make it so you don't need developers, that, an admin that can be somewhat technical can learn those. You can do uh, Apex triggered workflows through there. You can do scheduled. You can do um, a lot of very powerful, very light point and click dev things through their workflows, but they are big and complex. My very first project as a Salesforce consultant was very workflow heavy. I knew nothing about workflows, and I was calling workflows from other workflows and other processes in the middle of workflows. But I was a dedicated resource to them. I would say we have similar size user bases on the HubSpot side, but I was a dedicated resource for 15 months on that. So I worked 40 hours a week for that one client. It was well over $1 million engagement. And because it was me and another person, he was working on a different, he was working on their field service side of it. And they had kind of started before I got there. So maybe let's call it like even a 2 year engagement, $1 million. I mean, it would take us years to surpass $1 million engagement.
Just on the workflow side, for anyone that isn't familiar with Salesforce or HubSpot, uh, workflows in this context is just process automation. It's something that does steps in the background for you. I think the main difference and the experience that you're having with HubSpot ones is HubSpot's workflows are built for a single record at a time. So you enqueue or process a single record at a time, where the Salesforce side is, I don't know if it's built around, but is capable of selecting a group of records and you process all of those records in the same stepwise process, where HubSpot's one is each record goes through those steps independently. It's a simplification in terms of how complex builds are, but it is also a limitation if you've got really, really advanced requirements, at least at this point in time.
Sure. So the loop records, so like if you had to have a deal, right? You have an enrolled deal, you want to go get their line items and you want to process something with the line items. In HubSpot, you get to pick the first associated or the last associated, unless you have a custom coded workflow. In Salesforce, you just loop through those. And then the other one is a get record. If you have a custom coded workflow, you can go find a record that meets this criteria. You sort of get that on a sub level if you have like a record ID stored somewhere and you can go find a record ID that matches this record ID. But in Salesforce, you can define the criteria for the record that you want to get. And so it just is a little easier if you don't have that record ID stored somewhere.
It has true search or true get as opposed to
yep.
Match these two properties
yep.
exactly, and if they don't match exactly, you don't get anything back.
Correct. But I mean, the workflow interface on the HubSpot side is a lot easier to work with. It walks you through step by steps a lot easier than what it is in Salesforce, in my opinion. So, I think going back to an earlier question you had, Thomas, about learning HubSpot, I was lucky enough that those early projects I had time to be able to just go kind of build what I was solutioning. So I would learn, how to make something work as I was solutioning it, and then bounce that against Corné's experience of, okay, so this, yep, this is right. This is, um, you need to look at this. This is, I would have done this differently. So it was a probably an ideal learning experience in that regards, because I was allowed the time to get both of those experiences.
So let me ask you about this. I know a lot of clients will come in and they're confusing process with platform. How do you I don't know, get them off of thinking about platform and kind of recenter them on, hey, let's talk about the process part first.
Having a good solid process is everything. And I have kind of a mantra in my projects that I regularly tell people that your platform, so in this case HubSpot is not your process. A crappy process automated is still a crappy process. So fix the process. HubSpot will support it, but it's our job to figure out which parts HubSpot can support. Um, you know, it's always funny when you have a team that's kind of being a little resistant to moving to a new platform, and they think you're going to automate my job, you're going to take away. No, we still need you to push the buttons, we still need users at the other end of what we're building. But yeah, you definitely need a good solid process, and I would say our most successful projects are the ones that they are they at least have a good framework of what they want their process to be. Now it should be my team's job to come in and challenge some of that, find a better way. Ask are you sure you need to do that? Why are you doing that? That seems a little weird. But just making sure that that process is well defined. That's where we have, BPMN process flow is one of the first deliverables we give, and that is is the foundation of our builds. So do we understand the process? Do we understand what you're trying to do? Now we'll go in and solution everything around that process.
Just to be clear on that that process mapping is system agnostic. The one that I quite like to use is, if you can't do it without the tool, you can't do it at all. Might be slower, might be slightly more error prone if you're doing it without a tool. Tooling is good. It speeds us up, more consistent, less latency, etc., etc. But if you don't know how to do it without the tool, there is no way that you're going to be able to explain that to someone in terms of how to configure it in the tool to get a good outcome. It isn't possible. So entirely system agnostic. The BPMN diagrams do not include HubSpot specific components. They include business process at its core.
And that is one of the hardest things to get used to when you're doing a discovery session, is to not solution on the fly with the client. You really want to keep things system agnostic, because you never know if some weird thing is going to happen in the platform when you say, oh yeah, we can do that. You should probably assume that the platform can do it, and then the next question is, should it do it? Should we do this thing? Should we automate? What is it going to cause if we automate? I always, tell people, if it can't handle 90 or 80% of the if this then that, then you shouldn't do it, or you're going to have a lot of upset users, because they're going to have to find workarounds, and they will find workarounds, and then they're going to do things that you don't expect them to do. And that's when things break and you get bad data, and all the downstream things that you just worked so hard to try to give them a good user experience falls apart.
So one of the parts of this type of work that we do here at Unlimited that I find personally fascinating would be the human side of it. So I would love to hear what you're running into when, I don't know, I don't want to lead you too much on this, but like, if it's pretty obvious what the common sense solution should be, but there's people involved, like what types of like emotions or fears or I don't know, the less diagrammable stuff, like how are you managing, I guess, just the people involved when you're starting to talk about something that's probably personal to them with regards to this is the way we've always done it, or there's this fear around change. I guess, like, what are you running into in those kind of situations, and how do you work through it?
I would say the hardest transitions that I see are the ones that come from like a spreadsheets, right? So you have a some sort of outside sales team that is managing their process in a spreadsheet. There's a dozen of them. They all kind of manage it in a little bit different. Their manager has no insight into what they're doing, who their leads are, what their pipeline looks like, but they've managed and they've made their numbers. And why do I need to go into this platform? So in those cases, I always recommend getting them involved in UAT as quickly as possible. And the leaders are generally the ones that are kind of dictating the discovery and the build at that point in time. And it's not that they intentionally make decisions that aren't going to support the sales team, but the sales team is doing things that they have no idea, that the leaders have no idea they're doing. And those are the things that you discover um, during that UAT process. So getting them involved in, even if it's demos or, you know, getting them into the sandbox that can create records, do some things in parallel for a little while, they'll start to get comfortable, hopefully, or they'll ask questions. I often also say in my projects that without our end users, our jobs would be a whole lot easier, but you know, that's not really a whole lot of job security, and the whole reason we have jobs is because there's end users. So um, I wasn't a sales rep for a long time, so I do try to anticipate some of the weird things that they might do. But as I said earlier, if something isn't quite right, they will find a workaround and they will end up doing something that you never anticipated that they would do. And like, why are you doing that? Who told you to do that? But they just found a way to do what they needed to do. So um, trying to get ahead of that in demos or builds is the best way, getting their hands on that keyboard. Um, and then probably even some working sessions. So the way our team works is that we have implementation specialists. I'd like to do a lot of working sessions with them in that regard. So a page layout, right? Especially if they're coming from a Salesforce platform, sometimes it's a tough transition into what that page layout looks like and how those user clicks happen. So get some of your change champions or some of your lead salespeople involved in how that's set up. Then they get comfortable with it. I always say they can be your first line of defense because if I'm on with a VP of sales doing the discovery and the build, they don't want to get a bajillion questions from the sales team on how they do something in HubSpot. So getting one of their people involved can kind of be their first line of defense as they make that transition.
So what I'm hearing you say, when we're doing discovery, this is just funny to even, it's so obvious, it's funny. Leaders may not know what frontline workers are actually doing, right? Surprise, that's no surprise there. I'm assuming there's probably times when there's front end people that are in the discovery and they're going through, I don't know, the 17 or 35 steps or whatever that they're used to doing, but they might not have a reason why, right? The leader may have the why, the end user might have the actual, one, then two, then three. Is there a way to get those two reconciled early, or is it really when the rubber meets the road at UAT, right? Because they're also the client, and they also have
Hmm.
strong opinions, and so I'm sure
Yep.
it's a balancing act between those two. Uh, yeah, just love to hear like kind of what you see there, or even if you could wave a magic wand, what would you change about how teams work on the client side on an implementation project?
I would say it depends on how established their process is. So a lot of times you will find out that the weird things that they do that, steps 19 through 24 are because of their current system or limitations of their current system. So they've had to insert steps into the process to be able to get around certain things, or because there was this one sales rep that did something really weird and it caused a huge issue, 3 years ago. They don't work there anymore, but we implemented this check thing so that they couldn't get around and do this anymore. So it is definitely a balancing act because the more people you have in discovery, the longer it's going to take, and the harder it is to get a consensus in certain areas. If um, we get some red flags early on. It may be we're going to map the current process, and then we're going to bring some people in to have a conversation about the things that we could change in a future process. So then at that point, that case, we're doing two process maps. But that's probably the easiest way for them to visually see all of the weird things that are happening in their process, and then to make a definitive decision on moving forward.
Some people know why and other people know the what in terms of steps. There used to be a story, I don't know if this was just from the company that I worked at, but there was a power switch that got basically cycled every day. So someone would walk into a room, turn the power off in the room and come out, turn the power back on and continue on like along their day. Someone eventually asked them, "What are you doing?" They go, "I don't know. I've just always done this. Like for the last 15 years, every day I come in, I flip the switch on and off and off and on, and then I continue about my day." And then you talk to someone that's been there longer and they go, "Oh, we used to have a server in there that needed to be power cycled every day because otherwise it would crash in the middle of the day. But we decommissioned it 5 years ago, and just no one told the person that was flipping the switch on and off every day that you can stop doing that." So people get stuck in a cycle of, well, I've always done this, so I'm going to continue to do this. And I'm resistant to the idea of not doing it because it's part of my process now. It's just what I do, which can be really, really tough. At the end of the day, the systems we build they're a sequence of inputs, some processing steps and outputs. The important thing to always try and get right, and this is really, really difficult to do, is make sure that you collect the inputs you need to produce the outputs that you need. The steps in the middle are often very interchangeable. So you can take a long-winded recursive route through there in order to get to the output you need, or you can simplify, streamline, and get it to the point where you need it to be a lot quicker, a lot simpler way. Getting users to understand that if you can explain to me what you collect, so which piece of information do you need, and what do those look like at the end of the day when you actually use it, then we can help you streamline and take out a bunch of the nonsense that you're currently doing, that is historical baggage that you're carrying, or 2 systems ago that you've already decommissioned. You used to do this one thing and you've never stopped, and you're rebuilding that same problem into every system that you bring online now because it's part of the culture at this point. It's really, really difficult to balance that. But I think we do a decent job with that, don't you think?
Yeah, I think we do a good job. I think it also relies on being comfortable enough to ask, questions, and being okay with the answer. I think that's sometimes you go in making assumption that if I ask this question, they're going to make a certain decision, and ultimately it is their process. They own the process. They're going to have to enforce the process. So, we can make suggestions, but if they choose not to do it, there's not really a whole lot of recourse. It is somewhat satisfying when they make a decision that you had made a recommendation on, and they're like, "Ooh, we should have changed that." Like, yep, I know. As consultants, you do bring a lot of business knowledge with you, a lot of different industry knowledge, a lot of ways that people have accomplished certain things, and I think this is going off topic, but some of my team has gotten a little worried about Claude, and a client can go create a solution in Claude, but they don't have you. Don't sell yourself short. What you bring to the table, they can never get out of Claude, because they're going to have to put in an output or input to get an output, but they don't necessarily know what that input should be. So, I think that we are bring a lot to the table. And I think our team in particular brings a lot to the table, because we have a lot of very smart, very visionary people that will reinvent a platform for someone, and give them something they never really imagined could come from their CRM.
There's also knowledge in numbers. So yes, you can get another tool to suggest a solution, and perhaps it works, perhaps it doesn't. But we do so many projects at any one time, and we've done so many projects in the life of this company that I've seen 100 people trip over this exact hurdle. So I can help you walk around it or tell you when to jump so you avoid it well in advance, where if you try and do that on your own, you may come to a successful solution. I no doubt that there are very smart people out there that could, but you're going to be hitting your shins a lot during that process. And we can save you a lot of time, a lot of pain, a lot of heartache during that process, just because of the sheer volume that we're doing. And the sort of, we're working in very diverse industries. And it's interesting how overly complex some industries make things when you see a different industry doing the exact same thing in a much more simplified way. And we can advise you on that. We can bring some of that experience to the table and help you make good decisions, even if you choose to ignore it at times.
I have to state the obvious and say, Erin, as you were talking about working with some clients, you could have just as easily been talking about having teenagers or kids in their early 20s, where you're making a very common sense recommendation and you can see that they're not going to take it. And at some point, they'll understand why you were making the recommendation. So anyway, I know you were talking about clients, but as a father with 3 kids, very interchangeable with some advice you give to teenagers or those, technically you call them adult children when they're in their 20s, but I don't know about that.
I'm not sure if being a parent has influenced my consulting or being a consultant has influenced my parenting, but it is very similar. You're not
They're
incorrect.
very similar. I think one of the differences is clients will allow you to draw out a diagram, whereas a child wouldn't. They'd be like, "Let me stop you right there."
Thanks, but I got this. Sure.
Right, right.
Yep.
I try telling them
I
I have decades of experience on them, but they just don't listen.
Yep.
They just
I
make me
know
old.
everything. I'm officially 20. I know everything.
Yep. Yep.
That's funny. That is really funny. Right.
Perfect. Well, we are at our time for Welcome to the Tech Show. I want to thank our head of solution architecture and guest, Erin, today, and thank you all for joining us. And we will see you next time on Welcome to the Tech Show.